declare open the Economy and Infrastructure Committee public hearing for the inquiry into the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the tourism and events sectors. Please ensure that mobile phones are switched to silent and that background noise is minimised. I wish to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I wish to welcome any members of the public that are watching via the live broadcast. My name's Em Verdigan and I'm Chair of the Committee, and I'd like to introduce my fellow committee members, Mr Lee Talamas, Ms Wendy Lovell, Mr David Davis, Ms Bev MacArthur and also Mr Tim Quilty, who's joining us online. To witnesses, all evidence taken at this hearing is protected by parliamentary privilege as provided by the Constitution Act 1975 and further subject to provisions of the Legislative Council standing orders. Therefore, the information you provide during this hearing is protected by law. However, any comment reported outside the hearing may not be protected. All evidence is being recorded. You'll be provided for a proof version of the transcript following the hearing. Transcripts will ultimately be made public and posted on the committee's website. Any deliberately false evidence or misleading of the committee may be considered a contempt of Parliament. We welcome your opening comments, but ask that they be kept to a maximum of 5 to 10 minutes to allow plenty of time for discussion. Could you please start by giving your name for the benefit of our Hansard team and then begin your presentation. Over to you, Brendan.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Brendan McClements. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Visit Victoria. I'd like to begin today by also acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on where I am today, the Boonwurrung and the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge their culture, elders past and present and emerging, and I'd also like to extend my acknowledgement to traditional custodians right across the country from wherever you may be listening from. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. I'd like to take an opportunity to provide a short presentation on the things that we've seen from a Visit Victoria perspective as we've dealt through the impacts of COVID-19 over the last period of time. So if you'll indulge me, let me start. I'd like to probably touch on 4 areas. The context, which gives a bit of a framework on where Visit Victoria's work has been focused. The current environment, what our response is, what our role is as an organisation, and where we perhaps see the future going, recognising that the future's uncharted, so we're all speculating a bit there. I think the committee will have seen many of these stats before, but I think it's worth framing again. It's been an incredible period of time in the visitor economy over the last, since March last year as COVID hit. It injected, prior to 2020, it injected $32.5 billion into the Victorian economy. It's had a $19.5 billion impact on the visitor economy in 2020. Our role has been to support the industry through creative campaigns and building a strong pipeline of events. The industry is a quite complicated collection of different organisations, and I'm sure the committee's seen that already. There's many representative bodies, and there's a group of participants who've recognised perhaps for the first time how connected to the visitor economy they were. We're a great one for anagram. So we've got VTIC, we've got VECI, we've got AAOA, we've got the AHA.
All the regional tourism bodies.
All the regional RTBs, we've got the live music industry, and now we see a number of people starting to recognise just the interrelationship between visitors and the businesses they're involved in. What we've observed from our perspective is incredible stories of resilience and strength in our industry. A number of operators have done incredible things as they've adapted their business models, as everyone has had to, over the last 18 months to find a way forward. And that's one of the great success stories in the visit economy in Victoria, is the adaptability of the people in this industry. And we've been tracking consumer sentiment over the last 15 months as a key indicator of where things might be going. These 2 slides are very encouraging for us. It's consumer confidence, which is a great predictor of economic activity, and business confidence. For Visit Victoria, both these statistics are very encouraging for us where we find ourselves today. We're a forward-looking organisation. I know much of the committee's deliberation will be about the impacts over the last 18 months. We've been focused on where do we think we can get to in the next 18 months. It's going to be a grind, but starting with high levels of consumer and business confidence is a great position, we believe. These statistics are very interesting for us in their hotel occupancy levels in regional Vic and sorry, I might have skipped a slide there. And also a very encouraging component for us is the concern of catching COVID is its lowest ever as a barrier for travel. So it is a real positive in our industry that people are not concerned about catching COVID. What the concern about travel is the risk of being locked in your own state or locked out of your own state and not being able to get home. But there's been a trend here that as people have learnt to understand the implications of travel arrangements, the willingness to come back to travel after a lockdown has consistently shown itself to get less and less. So we can see perhaps towards the end of the chart there where you see a dip where there was a travel ban put in place. Confidence returned very quickly and it's been trending up from the start. So there is a willingness to consider travel, which is also very encouraging for us. This chart is hotel occupancy in regional Victoria and in Melbourne up until Jan 21. There's a lag in the data coming through, so we haven't got the latest quarter figures. But it tells quite a positive story. For regional Victoria, we are back to pre-pandemic levels of travel and economic activity, hotel bookings. There's certainly individual operators who've had a more difficult time than other operators, but in an overall sense, regional Victoria has it got back to its pre-pandemic levels. That's not to say they've had 12 months of little activity, but it's an encouraging sign that Victorians and Melburnians in particular are willing to get back into regional Victoria. And Melbourne, and I'm sure others have said, Melbourne has been severely affected here, but again, trend lines start to be encouraging. And I saw some comments in the papers today from Simon McGrath, who's the regional head of a core group, a very big accommodation provider in this space. And I'm actually seeing Simon today, who's indicated that his portfolio, Asia Pacific, is the highest performer across his peer groups for that worldwide industry, and Australia has been a strong market for them relative to others. A characteristic of the visitor economy in Australia, which is also a source of great comfort to us, is domestic visitation represents about 70% of the visitor economy in Australia, and similarly in Melbourne. So we are, if we can get ourselves in the best possible position, we have a core basis in Australia for our domestic tourism to be able to provide a level of support to the industry as a whole. Yes, international tourism would be great to come back. Yes, it will come back at some stage. But in the interim, we still have a significant economy and part of the economy we can focus on. From Visit Victoria's response, I mean, we saw ourselves in the last 18 months having a number of roles. I've got three broad levers I can pull on the demand side. One is marketing campaigns, activity to encourage people to visit. Major events sits under my portfolio, the staging and attraction and retention of major events. And the Melbourne Convention Bureau, we're a 51% owner. In a practical sense, that sits within Visit Victoria as well, so business events and how they come and perform. In the marketing space, we've conducted a number of campaigns. We decided very early on to focus on what we can do, not what we can't do. So campaigns around, particularly in the first instance, social media and PR to help people in the consideration phase, the dreaming phase of wanting to travel. Some of the work we did in this space is represented here. We were able to put into play a campaign called Click for Vic, which was designed to support regional producers. It was one of those campaigns that's, it was certainly a travel campaign, but recognising how people think about travel. While we couldn't travel, there was also the opportunity to explore from their own room and their own computer some of the products and things that they could bring out of regional Victoria. And we saw an incredible level of support for that. I think the statistics indicate that more than 25% of Victorians took a purchase action, went and bought something as a result of seeing the campaign. So it did deliver to our industry around the state the ability to keep revenue in the system. As restrictions have eased, we've moved into Stay Close, Go Further, which is the current campaign for our interstate market. And as you see, the response has been that regional Victoria is performing very well. This layered with things like travel vouchers has been able to stimulate demand. And Visit Melbourne, the last campaign there, who we're working with Working Dog on, is a campaign currently running outside of Victoria to encourage people to come. It's also starting to resonate. We're seeing that through our research. So we believe the first thing we need to do is do great marketing campaigns, and we think we're in a reasonable position with that without resting on our laurels. We know there's more work to be done. And in the major events and business events space, we are focused on, firstly, where events did have to be moved or cancelled in 2020, making sure that we could reschedule, keep them in the calendar, move to them a distant time. That generated an enormous amount of work both in the business and the major event space. And as we've been able to bring events back, get them up, get them running, working with the event owners, and everyone knows what a great job Australian Open did and Craig Tyler did in bringing the Australian Open back. And now we see our calendar starting to come back to something approaching pre-pandemic levels. So we do see, once the Australian got away, the Australian Open got away, we saw the Food and Wine Festival, the Fashion Festival, the International Comedy Festival, Harry Potter's reopened in our theatres, Come From Away's reopened in our theatres, Moulin Rouge is coming in September, State of Origin will be here in June. So in the major event space, we're starting to see some action come back, and we're actively pursuing. These tend to work on long lead times, so from 23 through to 32, we're actively pursuing opportunities to bring major events to the city. And in the MCB area, again, we saw an impact directly on business events being able to take place, but the recent innovation of announcing a national business event fund program to support event stages to bring their events to Melbourne. We've seen 50 applicants already for up to $25,000 in grants. That started to take place, and we were really pleased, actually, that we could stage what was then the largest business conference that had held since the pandemic hit, in April at the Melbourne Exhibition Centre, where 900 people in our industry came together to start the process of getting back. And I'd probably leave my comments there, Chair.
No, thank you very much for that, Brendan, for that quite comprehensive overlook of your work and also how the sector is tracking. I might maybe go around the room. There's quite a few committee members present here today, so I guess that's probably demonstrative of the level of interest. But I'll give everyone maybe one question each so that we can get around. I might kick off with myself, if that's okay. Could you provide a breakdown of the regional visitation stats region by region? Do you have that information?
I don't have it to hand, Chair. I can provide some additional information on that if you wish to. Yes,
yes please.
Yep.
I might hand over to Mr. Talamas and we'll keep going around in that direction. And then to Tim. We haven't forgotten you, Tim.
I was also interested in terms of the Click for Vic campaign. Initially, there would have been a huge spike in the take-up in that. I was just interested in how that's going at the moment.
Yes.
And whether there's been, if there's any information or data around follow-up purchases, and if that relationship that was established through that program has continued. I know with opening up, people would be possibly going to these places in person as following up from their purchase. But if that sort of initial connection has been sort of maintained and follow-up purchases, or
it's a very good question. There's a couple of things about Click for Vic that have come to the fore as we've done it. Clearly, as Victoria had certain restrictions in place, people's ability to move was limited, and Click for Vic was their opportunity to virtually travel and experience. So we saw a very, very significant interest in doing that. One of the unexpected pieces of feedback we got from operators as a result of Click for Vic was actually not only was it driving business into their businesses, but it was an extremely important part of their own mental health. During the course of the pandemic, Lee Doherty, who runs a business up at Mount Beauty, came and spoke to the team. Her business, Gather and Harvest, sort of a homeware shop up there, was able to put people on through Click for Vic, and she actually indicated that's the sort of support she wanted rather than a government handout. She wanted something that could help drive her business, and that gave her a greater sense of being. Since travel restrictions have lifted, We've moved into a different phase through our campaign to encourage travel. Click for Vic still is going. It exists on an online platform only. It was an above-the-line marketing campaign, so you saw it in the newspapers, you saw it in on TV. It's not there at this stage, but it does exist through the Visit Victoria platform, which has brought it brings 3-4 million people a quarter into visitvictoria.com, and people can still execute their purchases through Click for Vic on that platform. We've moved from maybe 15 to 20,000 people a day using Click for Vic to in the hundreds, but that 15 to 20,000 have moved across to stay close, go further. How do I actually get out there? Click for Vic remains. If we find ourselves in the unfortunate position of going backwards, our expectation is we would bring Click for Vic to a more prominent space to connect with people's particular circumstance at that stage.
Thank you. No worries.
On that, I also wish to mention that Mr. Bart and Mr. Jepp have also joined the committee.
Thank you.
Ms. Lovell.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. It's great, and some of the initiatives that you've had to try and restart the visitor economy has been fantastic so far. Something we've been hearing from operators is that the vouchers were terrific, but that they actually came probably at the wrong time because they came over that summer-autumn period when we had pretty busy visitor activity happening anyway. Those vouchers are now going to run out on the 31st of May at a time when Victorians tend to look to go north rather than stay in our own state. Last week we heard some fairly good evidence from operators down on the Great Ocean Road about extending those vouchers and perhaps streamlining them to include some midweek stay, etc. And I was just wondering if you had a view on the vouchers and whether you think that they should be, focused a little bit more, and whether they should be offered to interstate visitors to bring them into Victoria.
A couple of things on the vouchers. I thought they were a terrific initiative. Victoria did them particularly well. Some other states went a bit earlier and perhaps hadn't been as sophisticated in how they put the system together. But the Victorian system, and I was very supportive. It wasn't my decision, obviously, but to put them into play as quickly as possible, to provide as much support as quickly as we could. I was lucky enough to be part of an announcement, I think, that was made week before last around the City of Melbourne and the state coming together to put a Melbourne voucher scheme together. So I do know there is a Melbourne voucher scheme coming forward, which will be terrific, similar to what Sydney has done with its Dine and Discover. I think this is focused where we do have an ongoing challenge in bringing Melbourne back strongly. In terms of additional interstate travel vouchers, I assume it's a policy decision that's outside my pay grade. I'm sorry, committee member, but
do you think it would help to bring visitors to Victoria?
To bring visitors, so an interstate scheme. There's no one single thing that brings visitors to Victoria. Most travel is prompted by a combination of activities. So we are certainly doing what we need to do with our marketing campaigns and then making sure we've got events in place. I do know the airlines have been very aggressive on the Melbourne-Sydney route. For example, Sydney's our biggest market. You can get a $39 return airfare, Melbourne-Sydney, through Rex or through Virgin at the moment. So there's a lot of activity going into driving out-of-state visitation to Melbourne. I'm sure the government will consider whether a travel voucher is part of that mix as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Davis?
Thank you for your presentation, and you do have an absolutely central role in supporting both the tourism and events sector. There's one point about the events sector that I'd like to ask you about, and unlike in some other states, we've used our major event spaces for vaccinations. Now, I'm a big fan of vaccinations. It's an incredibly important process, but effectively doing that cuts out the use of those spaces for the purposes for which they're intended. And I guess what I'd say is, would it be helpful if the government found other proximate sites for vaccination, mass vaccination, and allowed our major event spaces to open up as major event spaces, given that they're huge drivers of visitation?
The placement of the vaccination centres is a difficult one for me to speculate on. I got my vaccination at Jeff's Shed a couple of weeks ago, so another 10 weeks and I can go for round 2. Through the business event, through the Convention Bureau, which we sit on, what I do know is that Jeff's Shed has an enormous capacity. It is continuing to stage major events, or events of scale. I think the Brickman Jurassic Park Lego exhibition's there at the moment. So it's finding itself able to accommodate both events that it would, and in fact our tourism conference was there at the same time, as well as providing some of the currently, it's not at full demand, it's not full capacity from an events perspective, so it's able to provide some of its space to also, at a convenient location, allow people to be vaccinated. Certainly that was my case.
But I'm looking ahead. You see the time lag or the time preparation period with events is quite long, especially with large events. So if we were to have a policy like some of the other states have, where they're not using their major event spaces for vaccination, they've found alternate ones, that would surely help open up the maximum prospects.
In the major event space that we've looked at, we haven't found a circumstance where we can't get access to the spaces we need to put the major events on at the moment.
Is that just because the scale that you're doing things at is not at its full? See, I mean, our biggest event space is the Convention Bureau.
Yeah.
Convention Centre, Jeff's Shed, as you're saying.
For that style of event, the major events places tend to be, if it's our sporting stadiums. So we are active in the sports stadium space, obviously with MCG, Amy Park, Marvel. Those places are available, and the AFL's getting away. Jeff's Shed at the moment, as we forecast through business events, provides a accessible area for us to do our job. We're not finding ourselves pushing up against the provision of a vaccination centre there. There is a nice mix that's finding it's a sensible level, and our forecasts aren't that we would see a competition between able to access that for a business event or...
So
they're living...
Centre, for example, is our biggest space. So the very biggest conventions can only go there.
Yeah, currently it's accommodating all our needs. Other industry, so we have 2 significant exhibitions there: the Lego Brickman Jurassic one, and then Loom and Illumination. That's both coming in there, and we're continuing to place through MCB our events there. And they're given the size and scale and the additional capacity that was put into the room, to the venue a couple of years ago, we're also able to accommodate the need for a vaccination centre.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of attending there recently. It was a babies and children's expo that was there, and it was right next to, and I didn't see any, there was no, it was quite clear if you want to go to the business events that were there in relation to children, or if you want to attend the vaccination hub, it was quite... clearly delineated and signed.
Peter King and his team have done a good job of being able to, in a difficult time, find the right place for that venue to be used, and it's in a very COVID-safe way. So,
So I just had one other question about the figure work that you might have. Do you have some, estimates of the leverage that we get from the events that are staged and the impact that has on tourism?
Yeah, major events and business events?
Yeah, all of them, yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to provide that.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms MacArthur?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr McClements. I think one of the most important messages that's been coming through in this inquiry is the concern about certainty. And if big events or the most minute events want to be conducted, they're nervous about doing it. Clients are nervous about getting involved. Organisers are nervous about making bookings because they're not sure whether a premier might shut down a border at a minute's notice and the whole event will be off the calendar. So what advice would you be giving about locking down borders when there's perhaps only a couple of cases in Melbourne, and certainly locking down the whole of country Victoria when there's just cases in Melbourne, because that's what's certainly going to make a huge difference to tourists coming into the state and events being conducted. You know, some of the border communities have no activity whatsoever because they're on the way to nowhere, and they no tourists are going through those small towns, but just in a tourism sense, but also for event organisers. So perhaps you'd comment.
Yeah, I'm pleased to. I think one of the things that we were very conscious of and very supportive of from our space from early on was the importance of treating this as a health emergency. Very early on in the piece, we've got people in different parts of the world. We heard terrible stories of what it was like in Europe, what it was like in America from our people. So we've been very, very locked into understanding that the treatment of this particular circumstance is a health emergency. And I've, to our team and our board collectively, we've never sought to second guess the health advice. It's very important for Victoria's and Australia's brand that we are regarded as a trusted and safe destination, whether that's domestic or international. So we haven't sought to deviate away from supporting treating this first and foremost as a health emergency. So individual decisions about individual times are not something that we've sought to second guess. We've sought to simply be able to adapt and evolve as the circumstances arise, and so many in our industry have been able to do the same thing. It has and is a circumstance that forces us all to reevaluate our own business models, how we operate, the way we do stuff. We have restructured our business entirely as a result of what's happened here, and across our industry, so many of our operators have done the same thing. I was talking to Shane Daly, who runs Maha, the restaurant at the other end of town recently, about his experience, and he spoke at our conference, his experience during COVID and his ability to adapt. He established an online platform in Providore to be able to accommodate the changes. There is uncertainty. That is a certainty, if that makes sense. So we are now in a world where accommodating the certainty of uncertainty is part of the job of all of us. In that framework, I support all the health advice. We've got it to an amazing place in this country. We all understand that. The ability to work through the next stage, we'll get there. For people in our industry, as in all industries, the certainty of uncertainty is a challenge.
So have you got the detailed health advice? Because we certainly haven't been able to get it. The advice that you're, suggesting, you've got the health advice that...
No, we follow the public health advice that's issued. If there is a need to lock down, we lock down. If there is a need to adjust, we adjust. We're in a good trend line on the public level health advice. It has continued to relax a little bit, not in the sense of take it easy, but just the restrictions have been eased. And in our industry, we've been a major beneficiary as this has happened over the last month or so. Our conference was able to take place with up to 1,000 people in a event space within the current guidelines, and they've actually eased a bit since there. I've spent quite a bit of time talking to people in the industry. It's, as I said at the start, it's an industry populated by a lot of different representative groups and characters. In a broad sense, we're optimistic people who work in our industry and passionate about it. And that was what came through at our conference. But I'm encouraged with what I hear from people who are operating day to day in the industry, whether they're in hotels, and we've seen a number of hotels open over the last little period. We've got the Next Hotel, Ovolo, W Hotel, all have opened. Crossley, the Lansmore Crossley Lodge. We've got a number of restaurants that have opened. We've seen Gimlet, Farmer's Daughter, Graysland in Spotswood. Speaking to people in the events industry in particular, those who deliver events, those who have clients who want to do events, they've been very encouraging in seeing green shoots. I mean, I'm not a big fan of following social pages in newspapers, but I have noted that even the Herald Sun on Sundays has now a whole page dedicated to Melbourne VIP, which is the fabulous events and photos from around our state. So we've got a wedding of the week. that I saw. Harry Potter Wedding of the Week, organised by Tory Jones Special Events in Ballarat last week. We had a gallery opening. We had a special lunch for cancer circumstances. It just says to me that there is some things starting to move into the industry.
Have you got feedback from your industry about the challenges that they're facing with getting staff
Yes.
and housing for staff, especially in rural areas?
Yes, we have. I was in Port Fairy recently. We took 3AW down there to help Melburnians understand the charms of Port Fairy, and it is an amazing place.
It's in my electorate.
Oh, is it? Oh, well,
Wonderful place.
it is. Can I say, unfortunately, that was the first time I've been there, so I'm now sold on Port Fairy, and 3AW's listeners were very impressed with it too. But talking to the owner of Blake's restaurant in Port Fairy, her feedback was, yes, if they could, they would open 7 days a week, 2 sittings a day, but they're experiencing a staff shortage, and that's across a number of industries and across Australia. One of my directors is Jerry Ryan, who owns Jayco Caravans, and he was quoted in the papers yesterday talking about his challenges in supply chain manufacturing engineering, as well as hospitality businesses. This is an issue that's affecting a number of organisations in a number of ways, not unique to the event space and the visitor economy space.
Thank you. I've got Mr. Quilty online and also Mr. Jepp online. We'll go to Mr. Quilty then Mr. Jepp. Mr. Quilty.
Sorry.
Thanks. All right. We've heard from sections of the event industry that Visit Victoria doesn't have a strong focus on the industry, especially the smaller businesses and smaller events in the industry, even to the point where there's been a suggestion that the relentless positive messaging you've been producing about how good everything's looking is undermining their campaign to say how bad things are for them still. So could you comment on that? But also, what support have you provided to minor events? And do you think the event industry needs separate representation from tourism in Victoria?
There's a couple of components to the question. We spend a lot of time, and in this last 12 months have really focused on becoming much closer to our industry. As I said at the start, there's lots of different representative groups, and then there's some individuals and organisations that have merged during this period where they've been very challenged. So through VTIC, and I noted through VTIC's submission to the committee that 88% of its members indicated they had some sort of support, government support, which was very reassuring. We would always look to improve what we could do. One of the things that we are doing is I'm asking, my chair and I will convene we're just trying to find the right date, a representative group from many of the organisations that we've talked about. So we'll see VECI, we'll see VTIC, we'll see individual event operators, Peter Jones Special Events and others. We want to understand, is there more we can do from the demand side? At a very practical level, we've launched our National Business Events Fund to allow event stages to access supporting funding with the support of the government to support their events, to de-risk them. This seems to be the challenge. There's a concern that if they commit, that at some stage, if settings change, they are exposed financially. So we've put in place a system to allow them access to financial support to make that happen. It's a very broad church, and we have live music, we have weddings, we have bar mitzvahs, we have parties, we have all sorts of things that in some ways define themselves as events, but often are members of other groups. So live music venues are often members of the AHA. So one of the challenges is often to get a clear line of sight on exactly the representatives and what they're saying. So that's why we're trying to bring a number of different people to the party, to VV, so we can hear directly from them. The question about the only other observation I'd make is New South Wales and Victoria have taken a particular approach in supporting event owners, which has been focused on providing financial support to the person staging the event. And it's very easy in hindsight to look at other things. There is also a federal scheme, a $50 million event here this year support scheme. It's designed slightly differently. where it is to try and subsidise the delegates' attendance. Now, that's certainly an option open to you. I think what's been more successful to manage the issues that we now better understand in the event industry is how do we de-risk the person who's staging the event from putting it on. So that's where New South Wales and Victoria focused. How do we de-risk the event organiser? The current scheme, and there has been discussions with the feds around how we could adjust that perhaps, because I don't think they've had a large subscription to their scheme. We would prefer if that scheme was focused on de-risking event organisers rather than subsidising delegates. And I think that you'd see a stronger take-up of that $50 million nationally, and including, obviously, in Victoria if that could happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Quilty. I might pass over to Mr. Jepp to ask a question. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your attendance this morning and a very informative presentation. A couple of questions. First, in relation to the issue that Ms. Lovell raised in her question, and it's about interstate visitors. We recently saw the federal government announce a half-price flight scheme, which only, unlike most other states and territories, only identified Avalon as a destination airport here in Victoria. Can you tell me what the feedback was from the industry, and if and what you would like to see in terms of that model going forward?
I presume the committee will have heard some of the feedback from industry as I did, which was probably the polite way of putting it is they were disappointed that Melbourne and, to be fair, Sydney were treated as source markets to provide other parts of Australia with visitation. When it was announced, I did take that up directly with people federally, and my counterpart at Tourism Australia, who I must say has been a strong supporter of domestic tourism, as well as Austrade, who designed the scheme. It was pretty hard to understand how they arrived at those destinations in that way. I am advised, and I saw some public comments, there seems to be some sort of algorithm that sits behind it to identify those parts of Australia that were suffering from international tourism droughts that needed some additional support.
That would surely have included Melbourne, though. You would
I would have thought so, yeah. And our articulation to federally was that Melbourne works in a particular way. We are a compact state, and most of our visitation, if you're interested in supporting Phillip Island or Gippsland, which has been badly affected, people come into Melbourne and it's distributed. It's a spoke and hub system, primarily in Melbourne. In Victoria. Other states are different, and we see that in Queensland with a number of airports up and down the seaboard there. But there was a degree of frustration expressed to me by the industry around the design of the program. There was certainly advocacy on our behalf federally around how do we land that Burnie was one of the badly hit international destinations. It didn't track with our numbers, but there's an algorithm apparently. And we've sought to see if we could, if it's extended in the future, include additional parts of Victoria. Yes, we would like to see Mildura included. We have an airport in Bendigo that would have been included, in addition to Avalon, and importantly Melbourne. So I think I'm meeting with Martin Ferguson, who's been appointed to a special task force about the future of the visitor economy. That's one of the discussion points we'll have. Not that it was his responsibility, I've got to say, but that's one of the things that has been put forward. And I'm aware that the RTBs provided a letter towards to Minister Tehan about their individual concerns around what had happened. So, and I'll probably leave my comments there.
Thank you. No, thank you. My other question relates to the issue that Mrs. MacArthur raised at the end of her questions, and that's around staffing and employment. And we've heard from a number of witnesses that the difficulties that people are experiencing staffing back up. And we know that much of the work in the tourism and events sector, according to witnesses, is casual work. It's insecure work. And there was issues around people being able to get access to JobKeeper and the like, and what they sought to do was secure, during this period, during the pandemic, secure their employment and ongoing financiality by taking up positions elsewhere. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that employment model for the industry going forward. I mean, is it an employment model that has reached its end? We heard recently there was a Fair Work Commission in relation to casualisation in the driver sector. So is this something that the industry needs to look at and turn those jobs into long-lasting, secure employment?
I'm going to defer to experts in the design of work on that one, I'm sorry to say. Where Visit Victoria is focused on is driving the demand. Absolutely acknowledge that there is a challenge at the moment across the industry, across all industries, in identifying and filling a number of jobs. It's a dynamic that's probably unexpected, particularly in regional Victoria, but there are wiser heads than me that are more expert on those sorts of issues that I think are ruminating on the best way in which to accommodate those challenges. In the interim, we're going to continue to focus on trying to ensure that we can return as much activity to this industry as possible.
Thank you. Mr McClements, on that note, and I'm aware of the time, I know a number of committee members have further questions. What I might do is, as a committee, we might ask everyone if you could send all your questions to Secretariat. We'll compile them and send them in one piece of correspondence to you. Thank you, Chair. And if you could respond in a timely fashion, that'd be appreciated. Certainly. I've really enjoyed your presentation today, and thank you for giving us as full and frank answers as you can. And I definitely following your popular marketing campaigns, and keep that up. Click for Vic was very popular. Yes. We heard that on our visits to regional Victoria.
Excellent.
How appreciative they were of that work. So keep it up. On that note, the committee will now take a short break.